Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland, and here I am in Leamington Spa outside 30 Clarendon Square, and this was the birthplace of the notorious Alisteir Crowley. So Alisteir Crowley was a most fascinating character, and he's known for being an occultist and an esotericist of the early 20th century. So he was born here in 1875. His parents had wed the year before in Kensington registry office in London. It was unusual they didn't have a church wedding, especially as they were Christian fundamentalists. They were absolutely zealous adherents of the Plymouth Brethren, that they had experimented with other non-conformist churches. So Alisteir Crowley, he was the first of several children. His father's a well-to-do engineer, but in fact had a fortune from, I think, brewing, which you would think that these Puritans might have considered somewhat immoral. But Alisteir Crowley, so he grew up in very comfortable circumstances, and he attended a number of Anglican public schools with Tunbridge and Malvern, both of which he detested. So he was a born rebel, and he wasn't particularly into sports and so on, despite being actually quite physically fit and questioning all the shibboleths of the day. And he was to experiment with all sorts of political ideologies, because although he was a real libertine in his personal life, he was somehow very attracted to totalitarianism, authoritarianism. Anyway, so what else about Crowley? And there's no blue plaque in his house, though he deserves one. So he went to Trinity College, Cambridge, which is the grandest college in Cambridge University, and by his mid-teens he thoroughly rejected Christianity. He felt that the Holy Bible was filled with lies, was always contradicting itself, and his father had died when Alisteir Crowley was 11, and that it was a very bitter blow for him. He really had his father on a pedestal, and that's maybe one of the things that made him think, well, you know, God wasn't very good to my father, who's very good to him. So Alisteir Crowley is actually Edward Alexander Crowley, but then he decided he didn't want to be that because he was known as Alec. He would go by Alisteir, and he also had an unusual, unique spelling of Alisteir, A-L-E-I-S-T-E-R. Despite the surname Crowley, he wasn't at all Irish, so far as I know. So he graduated from Cambridge. He'd been reading moral philosophy despite being quite immoral, and he was an advocate of a hedonistic lifestyle, of smoking as much as possible. That wasn't known to be unhealthy back then, of imbibing heroic quantities of alcohol, of consorted with public women and so on, and he contracted venereal diseases from that. So then he travelled because he had so much money. He didn't seem to ever have a paid job. He went to the United States, Mexico, France, Germany, Italy, all around Europe really, and was reading about different philosophies and experimenting with different religions and so on. He helped to form the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, this bizarre cult, and dabbling in different forms of spirituality, looking even at Satanism and things like that. So this didn't go down well with his rather staid family, but didn't seem to cut him off financially. He was also an outspoken advocate of bisexuality, which he tried himself, though he did have a slight preference for the female kind. I'm not aware if he had any children actually. So he wasn't involved in the First World War. He spent some time in Germany in the 1930s. He'd found communism deeply alluring for a while. Then he wondered whether Nazism might not be the answer. So he published dozens and dozens of books. He was an aficionado of Shelley and other writers like that, atheists radicali like him, but he was not particularly humanitarian. Anyway, in the Second World War, he proffered his hand to the Royal Navy because he was a very erudite person, could have been a gifted analyst. He was long in the tooth by that stage, couldn't have been like a serving officer, but they declined. His reputation was quite shocking. Indeed, he'd been in Italy just after the First World War, and the Italian press had got wind of his scandalous private life and outrageous opinions, and he'd been ordered to leave Italy at the time. So he's back here. And it was here he died in 1947 in a hospital in Warwick, not very far away from here. And then he was cremated at Brighton, a town where libertinism was well accepted, I suppose, being so close to France, a town with an unusual number of hôtels en passe, the unofficial gay capital of the United Kingdom. And they held some sort of religious service for him with the hymn to Pan and various like pagan ceremonies going on. So his cinders were sent to a friend of his in Hampton, New Jersey, who buried them in the garden there. And that is Alisteir Crowley, who was a complete one-off, a total one of a kind, who really liked to étaper le bourgeois. And it's surprisingly in this staid little town of Leamington Spa, with its Georgian architecture, which you think would be quite prim and buttoned up. So that is just a little bit about Alisteir Crowley, who's an absolute prolific poet, and no wonder he penned a lot, because of course he never had salaried employment so far as I know, so he could afford to spend an awful lot of time indulging in his literary endeavours, even though this didn't earn him a great deal of money. So thank you for watching my videos. So please subscribe to my channel and donate to me most liberally on PayPal. I'm georgecallahan79@gmail.com. I do online lessons in history, politics, religious studies, French, English as a foreign language, English language, English literature, citizenship, history. I help people with theses, dissertations, essays, elocution, interview preparation, and so forth. Right, thank you everyone. Goodbye.